All right, everyone. Hello. Why I disagree with John Piper on Romans 3, 1 through 8, part 3. Hopefully you will find and listen to parts 1 and 2, preferably in order. But anyway, so part 3. Let's talk about John Piper's own understanding of what's involved in Romans 3, 1 through 8, especially the first part. He basically says that Paul says that members of Israel sin and disbelieve God. Paul says God's wrath falls on such members of the nation of Israel who sin and disbelieve God. We're talking about real apostasy here, not the sins that believers commit, and the sin of not believing God, not trusting Him. And then God's wrath is righteous and faithful to His character. He's being righteous and faithful when His wrath falls on such covenant breakers, such unfaithful members of the nation of Israel. So, unbelieving Israelites, Paul's conversation partners at this point in the letter, object that God should not punish them for letting God display His righteousness and faithfulness. Okay, so that's supposed to be what's going on. I have questions about this. First of all, when we read the Gospels, do we see any problem among the Pharisees or Sadducees in believing that Jesus' circumcision had become quote-unquote uncircumcision when they got Him crucified? Alright? They regarded Jesus as cursed by God. He was circumcised, so why would they have any problem, in theory, believing that God's wrath falls on nominal Jews? In fact, the Pharisees believe this a lot. John 7:49 is a place to just say, look, the crowd's all accursed, they don't know the law. Mark 2:16, the Pharisees, basically, when you read the word sinners in the Gospels, it usually just means non-Pharisees. Sometimes it can mean people who are in serious sin, like prostitutes, but it can also just mean anyone who doesn't keep Pharisaical traditions. They regarded all these people as compromised. And also, even though Jesus emphasizes this point more in His ministry and uses it more, the Jews themselves also believed that they were God-fearing Gentiles who were superior to the compromised Jews. Luke 7:5 has the leaders, synagogue leaders, and people who would be called Pharisees, not necessarily unbelievers, because there were Pharisees that followed Jesus. But anyway, they said this Gentile, this centurion, I believe, was worthy of getting healed because he loved the nation of Israel and he had helped build the synagogue. So, what is in what Paul these statements that Paul is making that would possibly give us this response? It doesn't make any sense to me with the rest of Scripture. And also, look at what John Piper preaches about this reasoning that he believes the Jews are throwing into Paul's face. He says, one thing they say, and this is amazing, it is that God has now involved Himself in a colossal contradiction. If Paul is right, it's going to sound outrageous, but that is how far people will go when they realize that some of their long-cherished beliefs are crumbling. So he says that this is all desperate reasoning. It doesn't make much sense. And then he says, now get this. He describes what they believe. Our righteousness shows or magnifies God's righteousness when He judges us, and really we are not instruments of sin, we are instruments of God's glory to magnify His righteousness. Yeah, and again, as I said, they didn't seem to have this problem with saying that Jesus was not glorifying God, or that Jesus deserved death, that Jesus was unrighteous, so I don't get this. And then, that sounds like a word game. It is. It's a way you start using language when you've lost hold of reality. Well, again, maybe it's just because that's not really what Paul's refuting at all. Maybe that's just not the correct thing. Again, he couldn't judge the world if this sophistry of yours were true. So, in other words, Piper kind of admits that this whole thing is kind of unbelievable. And I would say it's not really we should then consider other alternative explanations for the text. I'm saying Dr. Piper himself gives us reasons to wonder if there's not some alternative explanation for what's going on in this text. Your word game, this is you fall into if you really think I'm a sinner and God would be righteous to judge me even though my sin would magnify His glory in my judgment. So you really don't hold your position. Right. They don't hold their position when they're condemning Paul. They wouldn't hold their position when they condemn Jesus. So if they don't hold the position, maybe the position's not there and this is not what Paul is refuting. Finally, on this nonsensical position, so this whole thing doesn't make any sense. And we may as well go on sinning. And then on that convoluted, weaseling use of language. So this is how Dr. Piper describes the position he insists that Paul is refuting in this passage. And so I've given you, some ideas of background, and I'll go on in further parts of this series to say what I don't think this is what is bothering Paul. This is not what the Jews are throwing up in Paul's face. This is not how they're objecting to his message. And by the way, he says that the condemnation is just because of their convoluted, weaseling use of language. I don't think that holds up. If you read there at the very end, when he says their condemnation is just, he's saying that because they're slandering him and his message. They're lying about the gospel. They're claiming that other people teach, let us do evil that good may come. Now, what is it about the gospel message, and especially about what it means for Israel and its place in God's plan, that would lead people to say that Paul teaches, let us do evil that good may come? With that in mind, I'll end this brief part, and we'll do more with the next part of the series. Thanks for your time.